In polite society, love is rarely spoken of. Affection is admired. Necessity, however, is forgiven, quietly, and only when it succeeds. Titles fade. Estates crumble. And desperation, when dressed well enough, is rarely questioned. Nathan Tinsley was born to a name that once opened doors. It now opened only memories. Charlotte Hartwell arrived with everything he lacked: independence, fortune, and the dangerous belief that affection could be chosen freely. Their meeting was not an accident. What followed was not immediately dishonest either. But when admiration is allowed to grow from calculation, love must eventually answer for its origins. This is not a story about a lie told aloud. It is a story about a truth postponed. Before this story continues, consider how often necessity is excused simply because it wears good manners. Stories like this are uncomfortable not because they are cruel, but because they are familiar. If you remain to the end, do not be another observer who turns away once the truth becomes inconvenient. Stay. Witness what happens when affection must answer for the reason it began. If you wish to remain, subscribe. If you believe someone else should hear this, share it, discreetly. And if this story stirred something in you, leave a mark before you go. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Then we may continue. Nathan Tinsley inherited his title at 23. By 30, he had learned that inheritance and ownership were not the same thing. The estate had been declining long before his father's death, quietly, in the way distinguished families preferred. Closed wings. Reduced staff. Repairs deferred until they became structural. His mother had spoken of it as temporary inconvenience, a brief season of economy before restoration. She had been saying this for 15 years. Nathan stood now in the library where 3 generations of Tinsleys had conducted their affairs, watching autumn light expose what lamplight concealed, water stains spreading across the ceiling plaster, the gap widening between window frame and wall. The ledger before him required no interpretation. 17 months. Perhaps 20, if he dismissed the remaining staff and closed the house entirely. After that, the estate would pass to creditors who would not preserve it, they would merely liquidate what remained. He had considered the available solutions with the same methodical attention his father had once applied to agricultural reports. Trade was impossible. A duke did not enter commerce, not without rendering the title meaningless, and if the title became meaningless, there was nothing left to preserve. Charity was worse. To accept financial rescue from another family would be to declare the Tinsleys extinct in everything but name. Which left marriage. Not a new strategy. Half the peerage had survived this way for generations, American fortunes shoring up English estates, new money purchasing old legitimacy. The arrangement was symmetrical enough to be respectable. He had resisted it longer than practical. But practicality, he had discovered, had a threshold. One reached it when the alternative was erasure. Nathan closed the ledger with care, as though the pages might crumble under emphasis. Through the window, he could see the south lawn where his grandfather had once held summer parties for 200 guests. The grass grew wild now, broken only by the stone path leading to the folly his great-grandmother had commissioned, a structure built for ornament, not use. Beautiful things, he thought, did not justify their existence by being beautiful. They required foundation, maintenance, resources. He had none of these. What he possessed was a name still recognized in certain rooms, manners inherited across generations, and the ability to appear composed while calculating necessity. It would have to be enough. The decision, once made, simplified everything. He would seek introduction to appropriate candidates, women of fortune seeking social elevation, families willing to exchange wealth for proximity to the peerage. The transaction would be conducted with discretion, dignity, and the understanding that affection, while pleasant, was not the currency that mattered. He felt no guilt about this. Guilt was a luxury reserved for those with choices. Nathan moved to the window, resting one hand against the frame. The wood felt solid still, though he knew the sill beneath the paint had begun to rot. Deception would not be required, only omission. He would court with sincerity, offer companionship, provide the social position such women sought. That his motivation included survival did not negate the genuineness of what he could offer. Or so he told himself. In 17 months, the estate would be lost regardless of his scruples. In 17 months, the name his family had carried for 2 centuries would mean nothing more than an entry in Burke's peerage, a record of extinction dressed in historical language. He would marry for preservation. And if affection followed, he would accept it as the kindness of circumstance. If it did not, he would accept that too. The light shifted. The water stain on the ceiling seemed to darken, spreading like an accusation he had not yet earned. Nathan straightened his cuffs and turned from the window. There was, after all, very little time. Charlotte Hartwell arrived in London with 3 trunks, a lady's maid she trusted, and no illusions about why she had been invited. American money had been crossing the Atlantic for a generation now, purchasing what could not be earned: history, position, the particular kind of respectability that required centuries to accumulate and mere months to acquire through marriage. She understood the exchange. She simply had no intention of completing it. Her father, a man who had built railroads across impossible terrain, had been frank about England's aristocracy. "They'll smile at your fortune and pity your origins in the same breath," he'd told her before she sailed. "Remember which one matters to them, and which one matters to you." Charlotte had remembered. Now, standing in the drawing-room of her aunt's Belgravia townhouse, she watched London society arrange itself with the precision of a business transaction. The younger sons with charm and debts. The widowed countesses seeking advantageous remarriage. The impeccable daughters of impeccable families who looked at her jewelry before her face. "You must attend Lady Pembroke's musicale," her aunt was saying, reviewing the week's invitations with editorial enthusiasm. "And the Ashworth ball is essential. Absolutely everyone will be there." Everyone who required her presence, Charlotte translated silently. She was not bitter about this. Bitterness implied surprise, and she had arrived prepared. What she had not anticipated was how tiring it would be, the constant calculation behind every introduction, the assessment in every greeting. At home, her wealth had been fact, neither virtue nor fault. Here, it was the only fact that mattered, discussed in whispers that were somehow louder than speech. "You seem distracted, my dear," her aunt observed, setting down the invitations. "Only tired from the journey. Well, you'll recover quickly, I'm sure. You're quite the topic of interest this season." Interest. The word her aunt used when she meant speculation. Charlotte had been prepared for this too, the assumption that any American heiress crossing the Atlantic did so in pursuit of a title, that independence was merely the performance one gave before inevitable surrender. They were wrong, but she had learned early that correcting assumptions only confirmed them. Better to let society believe what it wished while she did as she pleased. She had come to England because she wanted to see it, the history her country lacked, the architecture, the accumulated culture of centuries. She would attend balls because they were part of the experience, accept introductions because refusing them would be rude. But she would not be collected. Her father's fortune was hers by right and management. She had reviewed the accounts since she was 16, understood investment better than most men twice her age, and had no need of a husband's name to access what was already her own. If she married, and it remained an if, it would be because she chose someone worthy of partnership, not because she required rescue or completion. "There will be several eligible gentlemen at Lady Pembroke's," her aunt continued, unable to help herself. "The Earl of Ridgemorne is recently widowed, very distinguished. And I believe the Duke of Ashford may attend, though he's been rather scarce in society lately." "Perhaps he has better occupations," Charlotte suggested. "My dear, dukes rarely have occupations. That's rather the point." Charlotte smiled politely and said nothing. She had learned that silence could pass for agreement when necessary, and that agreement, particularly from wealthy young women, was expected regardless of conviction. Later, alone in her room, she stood at the window overlooking the square. London was handsomer than she'd expected, older certainly, carrying its history in every stone. But history, she thought, was merely the accumulation of previous decisions. And her decisions remained her own. She would attend the musicale. She would be gracious, observant, appropriately impressed. She would allow introductions and tolerate speculation. But she would not be bought, however elegantly the transaction was dressed. Charlotte turned from the window, catching her reflection in the mirror, a young woman in borrowed respectability, wearing a fortune that belonged to her alone. It would be enough. It would have to be. The introduction was arranged through Lady Pembroke, who understood such things. Nathan had known her since childhood. She had been a friend of his mother's, one of the few who still extended invitations after the Tinsley finances became obvious through absence. She asked no direct questions when he mentioned the American heiress, only nodded with the particular understanding of women who had navigated society's economics for decades. "Miss Hartwell is sensible," Lady Pembroke told him the afternoon before the musicale. "Not easily impressed, which may serve you better than you think. The obvious fortune hunters have already exhausted themselves." Nathan heard the warning beneath the information. He arrived at the musicale early, positioning himself where introduction would appear natural rather than pursued. The room filled gradually, the usual assembly of title and aspiration, arranged in careful proximity. Charlotte Hartwell entered without ceremony. She was handsomer than he'd expected, though handsome felt insufficient. There was a directness to her features that fashion plates did not capture, intelligence visible before beauty, interest before charm. She wore no ostentation. Her dress was elegant without announcement, her jewelry restrained. If she carried a fortune, she did not lead with it. Nathan found this unexpectedly disappointing. It would have been easier if she had been obvious. Lady Pembroke performed the introduction with casual precision, as though she had not engineered the proximity entirely. "Miss Hartwell, may I present the Duke of Ashford? Your Grace, Miss Charlotte Hartwell, recently arrived from New York." Nathan offered the appropriate acknowledgement. Charlotte returned it with equal formality. "I hope you are finding London agreeable, Miss Hartwell." "I am finding it older than expected," she replied. "Which is precisely what one hopes for in London." Not a deflection. An actual response. He had prepared for flattery or caution. Her candor arrived without either. "Older and colder, I imagine," he said. "After New York. Cold can be refreshing. It clarifies things." Lady Pembroke, sensing the conversation required no supervision, excused herself with practiced subtlety. Nathan indicated the chairs arranged at the room's perimeter. "Shall we clarify things from a seated position? The performance won't begin for another quarter hour." Charlotte accepted without hesitation, though he noticed she chose her chair before he could offer one, a small gesture of precedence that most women would not have claimed. They sat in the particular silence that precedes conversation, the kind that required decision about depth. "You have not been in society much this season," Charlotte observed. Direct again. Most women approached such topics obliquely. "I have been attending to estate matters," Nathan said, which was true if incomplete. "That sounds tedious." "It is. Though perhaps less tedious than attending every musicale in London." "I wouldn't know. This is my first." "Then I apologize for lowering your expectations immediately." She smiled, a real expression, not the practiced version women deployed like currency. "My expectations are my own responsibility, Your Grace." "Nathan," he said, surprising himself. "If we're to endure Lady Pembroke's niece performing Schubert, we might dispense with excessive formality." "Charlotte," she replied, "and I have low hopes for the Schubert, so you needn't apologize in advance." The conversation that followed was easier than strategy suggested. She asked intelligent questions about the estate, its location, its history, without the reverence most people applied to titled property. He asked about New York, her crossing, her impressions of London beyond its age and temperature. What Nathan had not prepared for was enjoyment. He had expected to perform interest. Instead, he found himself interested. Charlotte spoke without performance, listened without calculation. When she disagreed with his assessment of London's architecture, she said so plainly, offering her reasoning without apology. She treated him as though his title were incidental. He could not remember the last time someone had done that. The musicale began. Lady Pembroke's niece was, as predicted, adequate at best. Nathan and Charlotte exchanged a brief glance of shared assessment, no words necessary. When the performance concluded, Charlotte rose with clear intention to depart. Nathan stood as well, uncertain whether to request another meeting or allow coincidence to arrange it. Charlotte solved the problem for him. "I walk in Hyde Park most mornings," she said. "Near the Serpentine, around 10 o'clock. It's less crowded than afternoons." An invitation disguised as information. "I occasionally walk there myself," Nathan replied. "How convenient." She left without additional ceremony, her aunt trailing behind with visible satisfaction. Nathan remained in the drawing-room longer than necessary, under the pretense of conversing with Lady Pembroke. But he was not thinking about Lady Pembroke. He was thinking about how Charlotte had looked at him, with interest, but not need. With attention, but not calculation. It should have been ideal. It should have made everything simpler. Instead, Nathan felt the first suggestion of something he had not budgeted for, the possibility that deception, even by omission, would be more costly than he had estimated. He dismissed the thought. 17 months remained manageable only if he did not complicate necessity with sentiment. He would meet her in Hyde Park. He would continue what he had begun. And if he enjoyed her company, that was merely fortune's kindness, not a complication that required examination. They met in Hyde Park 3 times before anyone noticed. The first morning, Nathan arrived precisely at 10, positioned near the Serpentine with the careful casualness of someone who had not calculated the location. Charlotte appeared 7 minutes later, walking with her maid at a respectful distance. "Good morning," she said, as though they had planned nothing. "A pleasant coincidence," Nathan replied. "Very." They walked. The conversation moved through safe territory, observations about London's parks compared to New York's, the particular quality of English light, the way architecture revealed a city's priorities. Nothing intimate. Nothing that required vulnerability. Yet Nathan found himself noting details he had not intended to collect. The way Charlotte tilted her head slightly when considering a question, how she paused before responding as though testing her thoughts for accuracy, the fact that she wore no gloves despite the morning chill. When they parted after 40 minutes, Charlotte said only, "I expect I'll walk here again tomorrow." "As will I," Nathan said. The second morning, it rained lightly. Nathan assumed she would not come. She did. "Americans don't cancel for weather," she explained, rain dampening her hair in a way that made her seem younger, less defended. "Neither do dukes," Nathan said, though he had, in fact, considered staying home. They walked a shorter route, seeking shelter beneath the trees. The conversation shifted, still careful, but less guarded. Charlotte asked about his estate with genuine curiosity, not the performative interest most people affected. "How much land?" she asked. "Enough to require maintenance I cannot afford," Nathan said, then stopped, surprised by his own candor. Charlotte looked at him with something that might have been understanding. "Inheritance isn't always gift, is it?" "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." She did not press further, and he was grateful. The third morning arrived clear and cold. They met without preamble now, the pretense of coincidence abandoned. Charlotte brought a letter from her father, several pages of news from New York, business updates, paternal concern disguised as information. She read portions aloud as they walked, not because Nathan had asked, but because sharing felt natural. "He worries I'll be collected," she said, folding the letter with care. "Like some exotic specimen for an English estate." Nathan felt the weight of those words more than she could know. "And will you be?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "No." Simple certainty. "I've no interest in being ornamental." "What do you have interest in?" Charlotte considered this seriously. "Partnership, perhaps. If such a thing exists in marriage. Mutual respect. Someone who sees past the fortune to whatever else might be there." She said it without self-pity, merely as fact. Nathan should have felt encouraged. She had named exactly what he could offer, once the estate was secured. Instead, He felt something uncomfortably close to shame. "That seems reasonable," he managed. "Reasonable, but rare," Charlotte replied. "Most men see the fortune first. Some never see past it at all." They walked in silence for a moment. Nathan knew he should say something reassuring, something that established him as different from those other men. But the words would not come. Because he was not different. He had seen her fortune first. Had arranged introduction because of it. Had calculated her value before knowing her character. The fact that he now genuinely enjoyed her company did not erase the origin of his interest. "You've gone quiet," Charlotte observed. "Only thinking." "About?" "How difficult it must be," Nathan said carefully, "to trust anyone's intentions when fortune makes them suspect." Charlotte glanced at him with something that might have been appreciation. Yes. Exactly that. She trusted him, he realized. Trusted that he understood. Trusted that his interest was not mercenary. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest. Letters began arriving the following week. Charlotte's hand was clear and direct, her observations about London society both amusing and precise. Nathan responded with equal candor, their correspondence developing the easy rhythm their walks had established. He told himself he was merely maintaining the acquaintance. He told himself strategy required consistency. But when her letters arrived, he opened them immediately, and when he wrote responses, he found himself revising sentences to make them worthy of her attention. At Lady Rothwell's dinner, they were seated deliberately apart. Hostesses understood the value of strategic separation. Yet Nathan found himself tracking Charlotte's location throughout the evening, noting when she smiled at something Lord Pemberton said, when she looked bored during the third course, when she caught his eye across the table with an expression of shared tolerance. Afterward, in the drawing room, they spoke for only minutes before other guests intervened. But those minutes felt more substantial than the entire evening. "I leave for the country next week," Nathan mentioned. "Estate business that can't be postponed." "How long?" Charlotte asked. "A fortnight, perhaps 3 weeks." "That's unfortunate." The word hung between them, unfortunate, not inconvenient. A suggestion of something felt, not merely observed. Nathan should have been satisfied. The courtship was progressing exactly as planned. Charlotte's regard was evident, her trust established. He had achieved what necessity required. Yet as he returned home that evening, Nathan found himself thinking not about success, but about the conversation in Hyde Park. About Charlotte's hope for partnership, for someone who saw past her fortune. About how thoroughly he had failed to be that person. The estate ledgers waited in his study, their numbers unchanged. 16 months now. Perhaps fewer. Nathan sat at his desk, Charlotte's most recent letter visible at the corner of his vision. "I find London improves with proper company," she had written. "One might almost grow fond of it." He picked up his pen, intending to draft a response. Instead, he sat motionless, caught between what he had planned and what he was beginning to want. The distinction, he was discovering, mattered more than strategy had predicted. But not, perhaps, more than survival required. Nathan returned from the country to find 2 letters waiting. The first was from his solicitor. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 4 months unless substantial payment was made. The timeline had compressed, creditors were losing patience with promises. 4 months. Not 16. Not even 12. 4. The second letter was from Charlotte. He opened hers first. "London feels remarkably dull without someone to mock it with properly," she had written. "Lady Pemberton's garden party was everything you predicted, tedious conversation disguised as horticulture. I find I've grown accustomed to better company. I hope the estate matters resolved favorably. C." Nathan read it twice, noting the signature. Not Miss Hartwell anymore. Just C. The intimacy of it felt like indictment. He should end this. Confess his original intentions, accept her inevitable withdrawal, find another candidate with time he no longer possessed. He should. Instead, he sent a note requesting to call on her the following afternoon. She received him in her aunt's drawing-room with genuine pleasure that made his chest tighten. "You look tired," Charlotte observed, gesturing for him to sit. Estate business proved more complicated than anticipated. The kind that resolves, or the kind that persists? Nathan had not intended to be honest. But Charlotte's directness made evasion feel like cowardice. "The kind that has a deadline," he said carefully. She waited, not pressing, simply allowing space for whatever he might offer. "The estate is not," he stopped, recalibrated. "Financial matters require attention I cannot postpone." "I see," Charlotte said quietly. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was weighted. Charlotte seemed to be considering something, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "My father built his fortune from almost nothing," she finally said. "He told me once that necessity makes pragmatists of us all. That survival sometimes requires choices that comfort does not." Nathan felt the air leave his lungs. She was giving him an opening. A way to confess without accusation. "Your father sounds like a wise man," he managed. "He is. He's also survived things that would have destroyed men who had never known difficulty." She paused. "I think there's more courage in adaptation than in pride." Nathan heard what she was offering, understanding, perhaps even acceptance, if he would only speak plainly. This was the moment. The opportunity to set down the weight he had been carrying. He opened his mouth to begin. "Miss Hartwell," her aunt's voice interrupted from the doorway. "Your dressmaker has arrived early. Shall I have her wait?" Charlotte's expression shifted, a flicker of frustration quickly masked. "No, I'll come. Forgive me, Nathan. Poor timing." She stood, but paused before leaving. "Will you call again? Soon?" "Yes," he said. "Soon." After she left, Nathan remained seated, staring at nothing. She had offered him clemency before he'd even confessed the crime. He should feel relieved. Instead, he felt something closer to grief. Because he realized, with sudden and absolute clarity, that he loved her. Not the idea of her. Not her fortune or the solution she represented. Her. Charlotte. The woman who read her father's letters aloud and mocked tedious garden parties and offered understanding to someone who had not yet earned it. He loved her. And he was going to hurt her. Nathan left the townhouse walking, needing movement more than destination. His mind worked through scenarios with increasing desperation. He could confess now, immediately, and pray she would still consider him once the truth was spoken. But truth without solution was merely cruelty. What could he offer her? Affection wrapped in insolvency. Love paired with a crumbling estate and debts that would consume any fortune brought to marriage? She deserved better than to rescue him. She had said it herself, she would not be collected, would not be ornamental. If he confessed now, she would see herself as solution rather than partner. Everything she had wanted to avoid would become exactly what their marriage represented. He could walk away entirely. But the estate would still fall. His family's name would still be extinguished. And Charlotte would wonder why, would blame herself somehow, because that was what people did when offered no explanation. Or he could continue. Secure the engagement. Stabilize the estate. And then confess after, when the marriage could be true partnership rather than rescue. The rationalization felt thin even as he constructed it. But 4 months was not enough time for better options. Nathan stopped walking, finding himself outside his club without intending the destination. Inside, men who had solved their financial difficulties through marriage decades ago sat reading newspapers and discussing politics. They had survived. Their estates had survived. The arrangement had proven functional, even beneficial. No one spoke of love as prerequisite. Nathan entered the club, ordered brandy he did not want, and sat among men who had made the same choice he was making. They seemed unburdened by it. Perhaps, in time, he would be as well. Perhaps love and deception could coexist if the love was genuine. Perhaps Charlotte would forgive what she did not yet know required forgiveness. The brandy sat untouched. Nathan knew he was lying to himself. But lies, he had discovered, became easier with repetition. And he had 4 months to perfect them. He would call on Charlotte again tomorrow. He would continue what they had begun. He would secure what necessity demanded. And he would hope, with the desperate faith of someone who had exhausted rational options, that love might prove sufficient defense against the truth. It would not be. But hope, like deception, required no logic to persist. Nathan proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in May, in the gardens of her aunt's townhouse where wisteria had just begun to bloom. He had not planned the timing. Or perhaps he had planned nothing else for weeks. They had been walking, their custom now, these afternoon conversations that required no chaperone beyond the visibility of the house. Charlotte had been describing a letter from her father, some business matter in New York that had resolved favorably. "He asks when I intend to return," she said, then paused. "I find I have no immediate answer." Nathan heard the question beneath the statement. "Would you like an answer?" he asked quietly. Charlotte stopped walking, turned to face him fully. "That depends entirely on what the answer is." There were words he had prepared. Careful phrases about affection and regard, about compatibility and partnership. Honest sentiments, if incomplete. What emerged instead was simpler. "Don't return," he said. "Stay. Marry me." Charlotte's expression did not change immediately. She studied him with that directness he had come to recognize, the look that suggested she was measuring not his words, but his sincerity. "Why?" she asked. The question could have destroyed him. He could have said, "Because I need your fortune. Because my estate is collapsing and you represent salvation. Because 4 months is not enough time to find another solution." All true. What he said instead was also true. "Because I have come to depend on your company in ways I did not anticipate. Because you are the most intelligent person I have met in London, and possibly elsewhere. Because I believe we would suit each other remarkably well." "Those are reasons for friendship," Charlotte observed. "Not marriage. Perhaps the best marriages are built on friendship first. And affection." "Yes," Nathan said, meeting her gaze. "And affection." He meant it. Every word was accurate, even if incomplete. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Nathan forced himself not to fill the silence, not to elaborate or persuade. She would decide on her own terms, or not at all. "I did not come to London seeking marriage," she finally said. "I know. I have no need of a title. I know that as well. And I will not be ornamental. Charlotte." He said her name with more weight than he intended. "I am not asking you to be ornamental. I am asking you to be my wife. There is a considerable difference." "Is there?" She searched his face. "Or is that what every man tells every heiress before the contract is signed?" The words hit with precision she could not have known. "I cannot speak for other men," Nathan said carefully. "I can only tell you that I have no interest in a marriage of convenience disguised as affection. What I feel for you is," he stopped, chose his words. "It is real. Whatever else may be complicated, that is not." It was the closest he could come to confession without confession. Charlotte seemed to weigh this. "My father will require assurances." "Of course. And I will require honesty." Nathan's chest tightened. "Yes. Then I accept." The simplicity of it felt wrong, as though something this significant should require more ceremony, more declaration. But Charlotte had never been interested in ceremony. "You're certain?" he asked, needing to hear it again. "I am not impulsive, Nathan. I would not have spent these months in your company if I did not believe you to be someone worth knowing, worth choosing." She paused. "You are, I think, a good man in difficult circumstances." The assessment was so accurate it felt like prophecy. Nathan should have felt triumph, relief, the satisfaction of strategy completed. Instead, he felt the weight of her trust like physical pressure. I will try to deserve that assessment, he said quietly. I expect you will. They walked back toward the house in silence that felt both comfortable and charged. At the door, Charlotte turned to him. When will you tell your family? Immediately. And yours? I'll write to my father tonight. He'll want to meet you, of course. Likely travel here within the month. A month. Time enough to secure the first payment to creditors. Time enough to demonstrate solvency before inspection. Time enough to delay confession just a little longer. I look forward to meeting him, Nathan said. Charlotte smiled, genuine pleasure without reservation. He'll approve. He has excellent judgment about character. The words landed with unintentional cruelty. After she went inside, Nathan remained in the garden longer than necessary. The wisteria smelled sweet, almost overwhelming. Beautiful things, he thought again, required foundation. He had just secured his. The engagement was announced in the Times 3 days later. Responses arrived swiftly, congratulations that sounded sincere, invitations that had not been extended before, social elevation that accompanied the promise of American capital joining English lineage. Lady Pembroke sent a note of particular warmth. I am pleased to see wisdom rewarded. Miss Hartwell is fortunate, and you are wise. May you both find what you deserve. Nathan read it twice, uncertain whether the last line was blessing or curse. His solicitor received the news with barely concealed relief. This resolves the immediate crisis, Your Grace. Once the marriage settlements are established, we can address the creditors with actual solvency rather than promises. Yes, Nathan said. How convenient. The solicitor, immune to irony, agreed enthusiastically. Nathan sat in his study that evening, Charlotte's acceptance letter on his desk. She had written formally, confirming her decision for the records both families would require. I enter this engagement with full awareness and sincere regard, she had written. I trust we will build something worthy of the choice we have made. Trust. The word appeared twice in 3 sentences. Nathan had earned none of it. But he had secured the engagement. The estate would survive. His family's name would continue. In time, perhaps, the deception would matter less than the outcome. In time, perhaps, he would believe that. He folded her letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others, evidence of affection built on omission. Outside, night had settled over London. Somewhere in Belgravia, Charlotte was likely writing to her father, explaining her choice with characteristic clarity. Nathan wondered what she was saying. What reasons she was giving. Whether she mentioned love, or merely compatibility and regard. Whether she suspected anything at all. He hoped not. He hoped she never would. But hope, he was learning, offered no protection against truth. Only postponement. And he had perhaps 3 months left before postponement became exposure. Nathan extinguished the lamp and sat in darkness, engaged to a woman who trusted him, loved by a woman he was deceiving, bound to a future he had purchased with silence. It would have to be enough. It would have to be. Charlotte's father arrived in London on a Thursday. Nathan met him that afternoon at the Hartwell townhouse, a meeting arranged with the formality appropriate to discussing marriage settlements and financial arrangements. Jonathan Hartwell was exactly as Charlotte had described, direct, observant, possessed of the particular confidence that came from building rather than inheriting. "My daughter speaks highly of you," he said after initial pleasantries had been dispensed with. "That carries considerable weight. Charlotte is not easily impressed." "I am aware," Nathan said. "It is among her many virtues." "Virtues?" Hartwell smiled slightly. "Most men would begin with her fortune." "I am not most men." "No," Hartwell agreed. "Though you are a man with an estate. Which requires, as all estates do, maintenance." The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. Nathan kept his expression neutral. "The estate has been in my family for 7 generations. I take that responsibility seriously." "Of course. Responsibility to family is admirable." Hartwell pulled a document from his case, several pages of dense script. My solicitors prepared this preliminary review. Standard practice before marriage settlements are formalized. He slid it across the desk. Nathan recognized it immediately, a financial investigation. His estate's debts, the foreclosure timeline, creditor correspondence. Everything documented with American thoroughness. You researched me, Nathan said quietly. I research all investments. My daughter is the most valuable one I'll ever make. Hartwell's tone remained even. I need to understand what I'm investing in. Nathan felt the floor shifting beneath him. And what did you discover? That your estate has been insolvent for 3 years. That foreclosure proceedings begin in 9 weeks. That you need approximately £40,000 to avoid immediate collapse, and considerably more to restore actual solvency. Hartwell paused. That you likely knew all of this when you met my daughter. The words were not accusatory. They were simply factual, which somehow made them worse. Mr. Hartwell. I'm not angry, Hartwell interrupted. Anger would suggest surprise. I built railroads through territories where men killed each other over land rights. I understand necessity. What I need to know is whether my daughter understands it. Nathan felt his throat constrict. She does not. I suspected as much. Hartwell leaned back. Charlotte believes you courted her for affection, not survival. Both are true. Perhaps. But one preceded the other, didn't it? There was no defense that would not sound like excuse. Yes, Nathan said. Though by the time I proposed, affection had become, he stopped. I love your daughter, Mr. Hartwell. That is not strategy. I believe you. Hartwell's expression softened slightly. Men can need and love simultaneously. The question is whether Charlotte can accept being both. I intended to tell her, Nathan said. After the settlements were established. After the money was secure, you mean? The bluntness was like a blade. Yes. Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something unexpected, understanding. I married for love, he said. Had that luxury because I built my own fortune. You weren't afforded that option. I can respect the position you found yourself in. He paused. But Charlotte left New York specifically to avoid being valued for her wealth. You understand what this information would mean to her. Nathan understood perfectly. What will you do? He asked. Nothing, Hartwell said. This is not my decision to make. But the marriage settlements will be reviewed by solicitors on both sides. Your financial situation will be documented, discussed, made part of the formal record. He met Nathan's gaze directly. These things become known, usually at the most inconvenient moments. It was not a threat. It was a warning. How long? Nathan asked. Days. Perhaps a week. These documents circulate among lawyers, bankers, society. Someone will mention it. Someone always does. Nathan felt the carefully constructed future collapsing in slow motion. I should tell her first, he said, before she hears it elsewhere. Yes, Hartwell agreed. You should. The conversation ended with formal courtesy that felt like condolence. Nathan left the townhouse knowing he had perhaps 48 hours before the information spread beyond legal offices into drawing rooms. He should have gone directly to Charlotte. Instead, he walked. London moved around him, carriages, pedestrians, the ordinary business of early evening. No one noticed his distress. Crisis, he had learned, was rarely visible from outside. He had intended to tell her after. To confess once the estate was secure, once she was already committed, once the truth could be softened by fait accompli. He had told himself this was kindness. It was cowardice. And now the choice had been taken from him entirely. Nathan arrived at the Hartwell townhouse the following afternoon. Charlotte received him in the drawing room, pleasure evident in her greeting. My father enjoyed meeting you, she said. though he was rather cryptic about the financial discussions. He claimed these things were tedious and I needn't concern myself. "Charlotte," Nathan said quietly, "we need to speak." Something in his tone made her expression shift. "What's happened?" "Nothing has happened. But there is something you should know. Something I should have told you before." Charlotte sat down slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. "Go on." Nathan had rehearsed this, had prepared careful phrases that would explain without excusing, confess without pleading. What emerged was simpler. "I courted you deliberately," he said. "I sought introduction because I needed—" He stopped, forced himself to continue. "Because my estate is insolvent. Because I needed to marry wealth or lose everything my family built. Because you represented a solution I could not find elsewhere." Charlotte's expression did not change. She simply waited. "I intended it as strategy," Nathan continued. "But it became something else. What I feel for you is genuine. I love you, Charlotte. That was never false. But the beginning, the reason I sought you out, that was necessity, not affection." The silence that followed felt infinite. "I see," Charlotte finally said. Her voice was perfectly calm. "And when did you intend to tell me this?" "After the marriage settlements were established. After the money was secure." The same words her father had used. "Yes." Charlotte stood, moved to the window. Her back remained to him. "My father knows," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "His solicitors investigated." "And you're telling me now because the information is about to become public." "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because I should have told you weeks ago. Because I—" Nathan stopped. Explanations felt obscene. Charlotte turned. Her expression was not angry. It was something worse, carefully neutral, as though she were observing a stranger. "Did you ever intend to tell me?" she asked. "Or was the plan to simply let me believe the lie indefinitely?" "I intended." Nathan stopped. "I don't know. I told myself I would confess after. I don't know if I would have. At least that's honest." The word carried no warmth. "Charlotte, please understand." "I understand perfectly." Her voice remained level. "You needed money. I had it. You were charming and intelligent and everything I thought I wanted. And all of it, every walk, every letter, every conversation, was performed with an audience of one and a purpose I knew nothing about." "No," Nathan said urgently. "The affection was real. Is real." "Perhaps." Charlotte's gaze was steady. "But it grew from calculation. And I will never know which moments were genuine and which were strategy. You've made that impossible." Nathan had no defense. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. Charlotte was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been exhaustion. "I want you to leave. I need to think. And I need to think without you in the room constructing arguments about why this was necessary or forgivable." Nathan stood. "Charlotte. Please." He left without additional words. In the entrance hall, he passed Charlotte's father, who nodded once, acknowledgement without judgment. Outside, evening had begun to settle. Somewhere in London, the information was already circulating. By tomorrow's dinner parties, it would be established fact: the Duke of Ashford had courted the American heiress for her fortune. Society would not be surprised. They would think less of Charlotte for not recognizing it sooner. They would think nothing of Nathan at all, merely another aristocrat securing solvency through advantageous marriage. The system would absorb the scandal without disruption. But Charlotte would not. Charlotte did not summon him. 3 days passed without word. Nathan sent 2 letters, neither pleading, simply requesting opportunity to speak. Both went unanswered. On the 4th day, her aunt returned his letters unopened, accompanied by a note in Charlotte's hand: "I am not prepared for conversation. Please respect this." The politeness was worse than anger. Nathan had anticipated confrontation. Accusations he could answer, anger he could meet with contrition. But Charlotte offered him nothing, no argument to counter, no emotion to address. Only absence. Society noticed immediately. At Lady Rothwell's dinner, the placement told the story. Charlotte had been invited. Nathan had not. At the theatre, he saw her in the Pemberton box. She saw him as well, then looked away with deliberate calm. The engagement had not been formally dissolved. But neither was it acknowledged. London society observed this development with satisfaction. The narrative arranged itself efficiently. Naive American heiress, charming impoverished duke, mercenary courtship exposed. Charlotte was pitted. Nathan was exactly what everyone had assumed. No one seemed surprised. Lady Pembroke called on him a week after the revelation. She dispensed with pleasantries. "You are fortunate Charlotte is too dignified to make this a scandal," she said. "A less composed woman would have destroyed you publicly." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because you appear to be waiting for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or at least acknowledgement. Charlotte owes you neither." Nathan said nothing. "Did you love her?" Lady Pembroke asked. "Truly?" "Yes." "Then you have made an extraordinary miscalculation." She stood to leave. Love without honesty is merely skilled performance. And Charlotte has no use for theatre. After she left, Nathan sat alone in the drawing-room where he had once reviewed ledgers calculating how many months remained before collapse. The creditors had been paid. The estate was secure. He had achieved exactly what necessity demanded. The cost was simply higher than projected. Charlotte's father departed London 2 weeks after the revelation. Nathan learned this from his solicitor, who mentioned it while reviewing the marriage settlements that would now never be finalized. Mr. Hartwell left word that the engagement remains legally intact unless Miss Hartwell formally terminates it, the solicitor said. He suggests waiting until emotions settle before making permanent decisions. "How generous," Nathan said. "He struck me as a practical man. Perhaps he believes reconciliation possible." Nathan did not share this optimism. He had written Charlotte a final letter, not requesting meeting, simply offering truth without defense. "I do not ask forgiveness, as I have not earned the right to request it. I ask only that you know, what I felt for you was never false, even if its origin was. I loved you. I love you still. That will remain true regardless of whether you believe it. N." He sent it knowing she might not read it. 3 days later, it was returned. Unopened. Nathan placed it in the desk drawer with her other letters, the ones written when she still trusted him, still believed affection existed without calculation. Evidence of something that had been real, briefly, before truth made it unsustainable. Spring progressed into summer. Nathan remained in London though he had no reason to stay. The estate no longer required his immediate presence. The social invitations had diminished to those extended out of obligation rather than desire. He stayed because leaving felt like accepting finality, and because twice he had seen Charlotte in Hyde Park, walking at 10 in the morning, as she had when they first met. She had not acknowledged him, but she had not changed her route either. Nathan did not approach, did not attempt conversation, simply walked the same paths, maintaining distance that felt both respectful and unbearable. Once, their eyes met across the Serpentine. Charlotte looked at him for 3 seconds, long enough for him to see that she was not angry, not wounded, simply removed, as though observing someone she had known in a different life. Then she turned and walked away. Nathan remained by the water long after she had gone, watching light move across the surface, thinking about the difference between absence and erasure. Charlotte had not erased him. She had simply excised him, carefully, completely, with the precision of someone who understood that some wounds healed only through removal. He could not fault the surgery. He had, after all, handed her the blade. Charlotte agreed to see him in August. The note arrived without preamble, Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock. My aunt's drawing room. No explanation for the timing. No indication of what she hoped to achieve. Nathan arrived precisely at 3. Charlotte received him with the courtesy one might extend to a distant acquaintance, polite, measured, emptied of warmth. "Thank you for seeing me," Nathan said. "I'm not doing this for you." Charlotte remained standing. "I'm doing it because silence has become its own form of conversation, and I prefer clarity." "I understand." "Do you?" She regarded him with that familiar directness, though it no longer felt like invitation. "I've spent 2 months trying to distinguish what was real from what was strategy. I cannot. So I need you to tell me." Nathan had prepared for this. Had anticipated every question she might ask. What he had not prepared for was how much the asking would cost her. "What do you want to know?" he asked quietly. "The beginning. When you sought introduction, was there anything beyond calculation?" "No," Nathan said. "I arranged it deliberately. Lady Pembroke understood what I needed, though I never stated it directly. The introduction was pure strategy." Charlotte's expression did not change. "And the first conversation? At the musicale?" "I intended to be charming. Interested but not excessive. Create foundation for future courtship. But you were more intelligent than I anticipated. More direct. It became actual conversation rather than performance." He paused. "I enjoyed it. That was not planned." "The walks in Hyde Park?" "Those began as strategy," Nathan admitted. "But by the 3rd morning, I was attending because I wanted to see you. Not because I needed to." "When did that shift occur?" "I don't know exactly. Somewhere between intention and execution, the motivation changed." He met her gaze. "I'm not asking you to absolve that. Only acknowledging it happened." Charlotte moved to the window. "The letters you wrote, were those calculated?" "The first 2 were carefully constructed. After that, no. I wrote them because I wanted to share thoughts with you specifically. Because your responses mattered to me." "The proposal?" Nathan felt the weight of that question. "I proposed because I needed to secure the engagement before foreclosure became irreversible. But every word I said was true. I did love you. Do love you." "Love." Charlotte said the word as though testing its weight. "You understand that changes nothing? That loving me while deceiving me is not mitigation?" "Yes." "Then why tell me?" "Because you asked for clarity. And because I will not compound the original deception by lying about what I felt." Charlotte turned from the window. "What would you have done if my father's investigation had not forced your hand? Would you have told me?" This was the question Nathan had asked himself every day for 2 months. "I told myself I would. After the estate was secure, after we were married, I would confess and pray you would understand." He paused. "But I don't know if I would have found the courage. I suspect I would have continued the omission indefinitely, telling myself it was kindness." "At least you're honest about your dishonesty." The observation carried no warmth, but something in Charlotte's tone had shifted, not toward forgiveness, but toward something more complex. "I don't expect forgiveness," Nathan said. "I know what I took from you. The ability to trust your own judgment. The certainty that you were chosen for reasons beyond fortune. I understand those things cannot be restored." "Then what do you expect from this conversation?" "Nothing," Nathan said. "You asked for clarity. I'm providing it. What you do with that information is entirely your decision." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something unexpected, not anger, but exhaustion. "I wanted to hate you," she said. "It would have been simpler. But you were not cruel, only desperate. And desperation, I am learning, makes cowards of otherwise decent people. That does not excuse it." "No," Charlotte agreed. "It does not." She moved to the door, signaling the conversation's end. Nathan stood, accepting dismissal. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "if I could undo the beginning, choose different circumstances, approach you without need, I would. But I cannot. So I will simply say, you deserved better than what I offered. And I am sorry." Charlotte opened the door. "I know you are. But remorse is not restitution." Nathan left without additional words. In the entrance hall, he passed Charlotte's aunt, who regarded him with something that might have been pity. Outside, August heat pressed against the city. Nathan walked without destination, Charlotte's words repeating in his mind. Remorse is not restitution. She was right, of course. There was no action he could take that would undo the deception. No gesture that would restore what had been broken. The conversation had changed nothing except his understanding of exactly what he had destroyed. Truth, he discovered, offered no relief. Only accuracy. Charlotte made her decision in September. She sent no advance notice. Simply appeared at Nathan's London residence on a Tuesday morning, unaccompanied except for her maid waiting in the carriage. Nathan received her in the study where he had once calculated how many months remained before extinction. "I have considered everything," Charlotte said without preamble, "and I have reached a conclusion." Nathan waited, offering nothing that might influence what came next. "I do not doubt that you love me," Charlotte continued. "I believe that became true, perhaps despite your intentions. But love that originates in deception carries a weight that never fully lifts." She spoke with the clarity he had always admired, the directness that made evasion impossible. "I tried to imagine a future where this knowledge did not matter, where we might move past the beginning and build something honest from what remained." She paused. "I cannot imagine it." Every moment would carry the question, would he have chosen me without need? I would never know. You could never prove it. Nathan felt the words settle like verdict. "I understand," he said quietly. "I don't think you do. Not entirely." Charlotte's gaze remained steady. "I came to London believing wealth made me unchoosable. That any affection offered would be contaminated by calculation. You confirmed exactly what I feared. Not through malice, through circumstance. But confirmation nonetheless. I am sorry for that. I know. But sorrow does not restore what was taken." She drew a breath. "I am terminating the engagement. The announcement will appear in the Times tomorrow. My solicitors will handle the legal formalities." Nathan had expected this, had prepared himself for it over months of silence. What surprised him was the absence of relief. "Will you return to New York?" he asked. "Eventually. Not immediately." Charlotte's expression softened slightly, not toward forgiveness, but toward something more complex. "I find I still want to see England. Just not the version I was seeing through your courtship. You deserve that. You deserve considerably more." "Yes," Charlotte agreed simply. "I do." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I hope your estate survives. Genuinely. I understand what it means to you, the weight of legacy and preservation. I simply cannot be the instrument of that salvation. I would not ask you to be. You already did. That is why I must leave." Charlotte turned to go, then stopped once more. "There is something else. Something I need you to understand." Nathan waited. "If you had approached me honestly, if you had said from the beginning I need to marry wealth, but I believe we might suit each other well, I might have considered it." She met his eyes. "I am practical. I understand arrangement. What I cannot accept is having the choice taken from me through omission." The words struck with devastating precision. All of this, the deception, the loss, the months of silence, could have been avoided with honesty he had been too afraid to offer. "I wish I had known that," Nathan said quietly. "You could not have known. Because you never asked. You assumed I needed romance when what I actually needed was respect." Charlotte's voice carried no anger, only fact. That is the difference between strategy and partnership. She left then, with the same composure she had brought to every interaction since the truth surfaced. Nathan remained in the study long after her carriage departed. The engagement was dissolved. Charlotte would return to New York eventually, marry someone who offered honesty from the beginning, or not marry at all, which seemed equally likely. He had secured the estate. The Tinsley name would continue, preserved through capital gained and immediately lost. The cost had been calculated incorrectly. Nathan pulled Charlotte's letters from the desk drawer, the ones written before knowledge changed everything. Evidence of something that had been possible, briefly, before fear made him choose security over truth. He would keep them. Not as comfort, but as reminder. Love could indeed survive deception, perhaps. But trust, once broken, did not regenerate. And marriage without trust was merely contract, legal arrangement between strangers who shared proximity but not faith. Charlotte had been right to leave. She had been right about everything. Nathan placed the letters back in the drawer and closed it carefully. Outside, London continued its ordinary business. Carriages passed. Pedestrians walked. Life progressed without pause for personal catastrophe. The estate would survive. He would survive. But survival, Nathan had learned, was not the same as living. And he would spend considerable time learning to distinguish between the two. Somewhere in Belgravia, Charlotte was likely preparing for the social aftermath of a dissolved engagement, the questions, the speculation, the narrative that would follow her regardless of truth. She would manage it with characteristic dignity. She would survive as well. But neither of them, Nathan understood, would emerge unchanged. Love born from dishonesty might persist, but it would carry the scar of its origin forever. And some wounds, however honestly acknowledged, remained beyond healing. 2 years later, Nathan received a letter postmarked from New York. He recognized the handwriting immediately. The letter was brief. "I married last month. A business associate of my father's, a widower with 2 children and no need of my fortune beyond what partnership provides. We suit each other well. He knew my history before proposing. I appreciated the honesty. I thought you should know I found what I was looking for. I hope the estate prospers. Charlotte." Nathan read it twice, then placed it with the others in the drawer he had not opened in 20 months. He was pleased for her. Genuinely. The fact that pleasure arrived accompanied by something else, loss, perhaps, or simply recognition of finality, did not diminish its sincerity. The estate had indeed prospered. Modest prosperity, built through careful management rather than sudden fortune. Nathan had sold the London residence, consolidated holdings, learned to distinguish between preservation and pride. The Tinsley name continued. The estate functioned. Legacy persisted. He had achieved what necessity demanded, though not through the means originally calculated. There had been no other courtships. No further attempts at marriage. Not from principle, but from exhaustion. Nathan had learned that some capacities, once spent, required considerable time to regenerate. And trust, the ability to offer it, to earn it, to build upon it, was among them. He remained in the country mostly, attending to matters that had once seemed tedious but now provided structure. The tenants knew him. The land responded to attention. Quiet satisfactions accumulated slowly. It was not the life he had imagined at 30. But it was honest. And honesty, he had discovered, offered its own form of peace. On occasion, Nathan walked the estate grounds and thought about what might have been different. Not with regret. Regret served no function beyond self-punishment, but with clarity. He had loved Charlotte. Still did, in the particular way one loved what had been lost through one's own failures. But love without foundation was merely sentiment. And sentiment, however genuine, could not bear the weight of lifelong partnership. Charlotte had understood this before he did. She had been right to leave. Right to seek honesty elsewhere. Right to build her life with someone who offered truth from the beginning. Nathan hoped her husband deserved her. Hoped he understood the particular gift of her trust, earned rather than assumed. hoped he never took for granted what Nathan had discovered too late, that Charlotte's fortune had been the least valuable thing about her. Evening settled over the estate. Nathan stood at the window of the study where this had all begun, watching light fade across land that would pass to distant cousins eventually. He had no heir, would likely have none. The Tinsley name would persist in records, if not in blood. Perhaps that was sufficient. Perhaps legacy was simply what remained after all other ambitions had been surrendered. In New York, Charlotte was building a life Nathan would never witness. Partnership with someone who had offered respect from the first conversation. Children who would know her as mother, not merely heiress. A future earned through clarity rather than calculation. Nathan was glad she had found it. The cost of that gladness, the knowledge of what he had lost, what he had destroyed through fear and insufficient courage, was something he carried quietly. Some debts could not be paid. Some mistakes could not be corrected. One simply acknowledged them and continued. The estate would survive him. The land would persist. Future generations might walk these grounds and know nothing of the choices made to preserve them. History would record only facts. The estate survived, the name continued, crisis was averted through means both typical and unremarkable. No one would know about the American heiress who had almost been duchess. No one would remember the love that had been real but insufficient. Except Nathan. And Charlotte. And perhaps that was enough, to carry the truth privately, to remember what had been learned, to honor loss through change rather than repetition. Nathan turned from the window. The study was dark now, but he did not light the lamp. Some things were better examined in shadow. Some truths required darkness to be seen clearly. And what remained, after everything, was simply this. Love had existed. Trust had been broken. Both had survived, separately, carrying knowledge that would shape every choice that followed. There was no redemption in this. No reconciliation. No restoration of what had been lost. Only continuation. And sometimes, continuation was the only victory circumstance permitted. If these tales have touched your heart today, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our circle. It costs nothing to join us, but to a creator, your presence means the world. Without your support, these stories remain unheard, and no passion should ever go to waste. Turn on notifications so we may continue this journey together, and share this video with someone who needs a little romance in their life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which part of the story stayed with you the longest? Stay tuned for another powerful tale appearing on your screen now. Let yourself be swept away once more. With love, the Lord Whistledown Romance Tales team.